Another fan favorite, Gyarados. Embodying that classic RPG trope of, yeah, it's weak, but once you level it up, it's gonna be pretty good. And in the TCG, it's pretty consistent. It's usually attach a bunch of water energy, deal a bunch of damage. But speaking more generally of Gyarados as a Pokemon, one thing you'll notice is that over time, depending on the sprite or even the game that Gyarados is in, its appearance is different. Be it small changes or drastic design changes, sometimes I don't even want to use Gyarados in a game because its sprite can go between looking super cool or super stupid. Looking at you, Gens 3 and 5. And these changes are even more present in the TCG, as Gyarados' interpretation is completely up to the artist and how they want to portray Gyarados. So we will keep that in mind as we go through all of the mainline Gyarados TCG cards printed thus far, starting with Base Set. A truly iconic card. When I think back to Base Set, this is one of the first cards that comes to mind, even over stuff like Blastoise and Charizard, because Gyarados was one of the cards I used most as a kid. Not only was it more readily available than some of those rarer cards, but you could just straight up deal 50 damage for 3 water energy. It didn't require a lot of thought. And you've probably noticed, man, this card has a lot of bright yellows in it. Thankfully, whenever it was reprinted in Base Set 2, it was dulled down a little bit, which makes the artwork a lot more readable, as you can actually tell where the scales and the fins actually end and another one begins, but it also makes for a much better contrast with that holographic background. When it came to the Base Set era competitive, Gyarados did get a bit overshone by cards like Lapras or Fossil Articuno, but when you're thinking back to just Base Set, Gyarados was kind of the go-to rain dance card. Yeah, there was still some competition because you still had big water cards like Poliwrath and Dugong, but when it came to the most amount of damage per water energy, Gyarados was the way to go. Like I mentioned earlier, the Fossil set brought about some more strategic water types that made their way into rain dance decks, so Gyarados didn't see very much play outside of more like budget decks until the Prop 15 format, where the amount of trainers you could use was limited, so you had to focus more on Pokemon and get a little bit more creative in how you stacked your deck with Pokemon, which brought about a new form of Rain Dance that incorporated the card Recall. And I have a full deck list for this deck if you want to check that out in the Prop 15 playlist, but the general concept was that you would get your water energy onto Gyarados using Blastoise's Rain Dance, dealing high damage with Dragon Rage over and over again, and a little late in the game, whenever Gyarados had a bunch of damage counters stacked on it, you would recall Magikarp's Flail attack, which could deal upwards of 70, 80, even 90 damage. A very fun deck to play, especially if your opponent does not know what your strategy is. Next on our Gyarados journey is Dark Gyarados from the Rocket set, and this artwork, man, they really nailed with this set, making Pokemon look more unstable or damaged or dangerous. Dark Gyarados is no exception. Most noteworthy on this card is the Final Beam Pokemon power, where if Dark Gyarados is knocked out by an attack, you flip a coin, and if heads, you deal 20 damage to the opposing Pokemon for each water energy on Dark Gyarados. So if you've been firing off Ice Beams, Final Beam can potentially deal 60 damage if you get that coin flip, which could potentially knock out your opponent's Pokemon just for knocking you out, or could at least set you up for a great counterattack on your next turn. Unfortunately, basing an entire deck around just your Pokemon getting knocked out and dealing damage isn't super constructive, and so Dark Gyarados never really found its own archetype. I'll sometimes use it in evolution decks just because the Rocket Magikarp's rapid evolution attack can actually get around Fossil Aerodactyl's power and start triggering those other evolutions, but generally speaking, it doesn't see a whole lot of play. But I do have a Dark Evolutions deck on the channel, also called Evolutions, if you want to check it out and see what that deck list actually looks like with Dark Gyarados. I should also mention the Dark Gyarados pre-release promo that had the pre-release stamp down in the bottom right corner. This used to basically be a joke card because every single kid had one, even though we didn't actually have any pre-release tournaments in my area, so we have no idea how anyone got a hold of these things. Moving into the gym sets, we have Misty's Gyarados, which uses that beautiful Ken Sugimori artwork. A card notorious for people trying their damnness to make it work, be it in Prop 15, Base Neo, whatever format they can possibly try it, by shutting down the Rebellion Pokemon power, which can actually cause an attack to fail if you hit the wrong coin flips, which can be pretty disappointing if you've spent the time to get 4 water energy onto Misty's Gyarados just to use Tidal Wave. So if you do run into Misty's Gyarados in an opposing deck, it's usually going to be ran alongside Fossil Muck so that Rebellion is shut down and it just becomes a Tidal Wave powerhouse. But even with 70 damage for 4 water energy, it's still not that efficient. It's going to be outclassed by a ton of other cards in any format. We also have Giovanni's Gyarados, which has a little less HP and an absolutely garbage first attack for 1 water energy. Dragon Tornado could be useful if you want to get into some bench swapping shenanigans like with Gust of Wind, maybe incorporate like Dark Dugtrio, but when it comes to that type of deck, there's just better builds within Prop 15 and Base Neo, so I don't really know why you would ever use this card. It's also got Ken Sugimori artwork, but it's not as dynamic or pretty to look at as Misty's Gyarados, so unfortunately this Gyarados is also just kind of like going to the bottom of the stack. Moving right along to Neo Revelation, we have Shining Gyarados, which is a basic Pokemon with 100 HP and depicts the iconic Red Gyarados from the Lake of Rage. Fantastic artwork. Whenever I was a kid and I would flip through Pojo's or Beckett's Pokemon Collector magazines, this is the first card I can ever remember seeing as being priced over $100. Like the majority of other Shining Pokemon cards, it's utterly useless. It's basically a collector's item. Outrage and Devastate both have energy costs that are ridiculous, and the effect of those attacks doesn't really help at all either because they're pretty bad too. But damn, is it pretty to look at. And I really wish it was getting a reprint, much like Shining Magikarp from the same set, which is going to be in the 25th anniversary celebration set. But as of now, no sign of a Shining Gyarados reprint. In the Japanese exclusive Versus series, we did get Claire's Gyarados, or Clarados, which is making a big old snorty face in the artwork, which makes me not like it. And much like most Versus cards, it's not really competitive. There's not a whole lot to write home about. This entire set was basically a bunch of promo cards. That being said, Lance's Gyarados from the same set isn't bad for a 70 HP basic. Dragonstorm can be pretty useful, especially for spread decks if you're running something like Dark Crobat. And I really dig the artwork. In the Versus series, a different artist was assigned to each trainer so that, for instance, all of Lance's Pokemon all had a similar art style, which has kind of this classic medieval cross-hatching kind of technique that I really enjoy, and you don't see that a lot in the TCG anymore. I did not like Skyridge Gyarados artwork. The holographic background does help as it brings out a lot of nicer qualities about the artwork, despite the problems I have with it. As far as a competitive card goes, this Gyarados is very interesting, both with Flame Vapor and Dragon's Vengeance. You're getting another 4 energy attack, but this time 3 of them are colorless, so you can kind of mix this in with other decks. And the fact that you can double the damage if Gyarados is close to being knocked out kind of goes back to that recall strategy with base Gyarados. Unfortunately, e-reader cards in general just didn't see a lot of use because they came at the very end of the Wizards of the Coast era where they were kind of ignored and nobody really had time to pick them up. So the potential for creativity is there. It's just historically we don't have a whole lot to base it on. There's not been a whole lot of exploration of the e-reader cards. Moving right along to EX Dragon, we get some cartoony, fun artwork here. I actually really like this Gyarados, and this is one of the forgotten Gyarados cards, again, because it was in an e-reader set, but Dragon Crush is a pretty good disruptive attack. It's just a shame that Aquasonic has such a ridiculous attack cost for the damage output, but that just be how a Gyarados do. Big ol' energy costs. In EX Fire Red and Leaf Green, we got the very first Gyarados EX. And you have to keep in mind, with a lot of Gyarados cards, the playability is also based on the playability of the Magikarp from that set, which in this case did have an auto evolution attack, which is helpful for a Pokemon with 30 HP since it's almost always going to be bench bait. Gyarados EX does have a pretty solid first attack in Twister. For only 2 energy, you're going to be dealing 40 damage with the potential to discard an energy off your opponent's Pokemon, but also the potential that the attack does nothing. And then again, with its secondary attack Dragon Rage, you're never going to be using it. There's much better uses for 5 energy than to just deal 100 damage. Even well into the EX format, where you did have a lot of forms of energy acceleration, there were still just better uses of all that energy than to stack them onto your Gyarados EX and, you know, potentially end up giving your opponent 2 prizes because of all the time you've spent on that energy acceleration. Especially when compared to its EX contemporaries in like Electabuzz and Magmar, which are very energy efficient and reminiscent of those base set cards, Gyarados looks a lot less playable, especially when you're considering the 30 HP Magikarp that you have to evolve from. With EX Team Rocket Returns, we got another Dark Gyarados that was very reminiscent of the original Rocket set Dark Gyarados with Dark Scale. But unlike Final Beam, Dark Scale does not require a coin flip. It's going to place 3 damage counters automatically as long as Dark Gyarados is your active Pokemon when it is knocked out. Though it may make your opponent hesitate to attack, it's pretty easy to get around as you could just send Dark Gyarados to the bench and knock it out from there. But I still like this card, even though its HP is a little low, as with most Dark Pokemon. It's still got 2 pretty decent attacks and can still benefit from Special Dark, so it's not unusable, but it's not one of the defining cards of that metagame either. Gyarados is just one of those Pokemon that even though it may not be at the top of the metagame, it can still always find its way into some rogue decks, and that's exactly what the EX Deoxys Gyarados did, because it had a pretty good Dragon Spark attack for only 1 energy where you could spread damage, but you could also easily get off a Pulverize on turn 3 to deal 100 damage. So you could actually get the jump on your opponent as long as you were fast enough with your setup. However, the problem was that in the EX era, Rare Candy made it so that your opponent could get some EX Pokemon set up way faster and with some more powerful attacks for about the same amount of energy as this Gyarados. So it was kind of relegated to just being more of like a rogue deck or even just like a starter deck Pokemon. Holland Phantoms, one of my all-time favorite sets, does not disappoint with this Gyarados artwork. It is magnificent. I love the color work in this card. Where it does disappoint a little bit is with the actual card itself, where Gyarados Delta doesn't necessarily have any good attacks, any really usable attacks, and Delta Reactor as a Pokebody is more of a bench warmer ability, which really wouldn't make all that much of a difference in game anyway. But wait, there's more! Holland Phantoms also gave us a Delta Gyarados Star, which is maybe one of the most Gyarados-y cards that have ever existed. So for one, it is a basic Pokemon. You don't have to worry about evolving it up from a pathetic Magikarp. Spiral Growth has the potential to attach just as many energies you can have in your discard onto this Gyarados so that All Out Blast is actually usable. And then we have the attack itself, which discards cards from the top of your deck until you only have 1 card left in your deck, and then it deals 50 damage plus 20 more for every energy card you discarded this way. So this is a high risk, high reward type of card that isn't necessarily really going to be winning you any games unless your opponent only has 1 Pokemon and it's in the active position. Otherwise, it's just an extremely fun way to deck yourself out or to deal a ridiculous amount of damage very early game. Also, I would just want to take this moment to appreciate that Gyarados was given a Fire type card, an Electric type, a Steel type, and a Dark type card all before it ever got TCG representation for its secondary typing. People tend to forget that Gyarados is also a Flying type, and I guess the TCG also forgets that. Alright, now we got another Rogue type Gyarados card coming through with the Gyarados from Mysterious Treasures. Enrage isn't that great of an attack. What you're going to be relying on more is Gyarados' Pokebody Dragon DNA, in which it can use attacks from the Magikarp that it is evolved from, and it just so happens that in Mysterious Treasures, Magikarp has Flail. So much like with the classic Recall combo, Gyarados from Mysterious Treasures can do 10 damage times the number of damage counters on it, plus an additional 30 thanks to Dragon DNA, meaning that for 1 energy you could deal up to 140 damage with this Gyarados, which is very good. It's just also very situational. One of the biggest inspirations for me doing this Gyarados TCG list is because of the Gyarados from Stormfront, which was the center point of my favorite Diamond Pearl era deck. And this deck actually meant competitive business, as it did take 5th place at the 2009 World's Masters Division, but the real terror of this deck was how quickly it tore through city championships and regional tournaments off of only Tail Revenge, which is an attack that costs 0 energy and could deal 100 damage on your first turn. I absolutely love these fast-acting, very technical decks. What you would do is utilize a lot of search support cards to get the cards you need into your hand, like those Magikarp, and then you would utilize a lot of support Pokemon and other trainer cards to discard them from your hand. That way, 3 of them are in your discard pile as soon as you need them. And the DP era had a ton of cards that were amazing supports, like Claydol, Uxie, Azelf, and of course the Stadium card of Broken Space-Time, which let you evolve that Magikarp the same turn you played it, so that you would have a Pokemon with 130 HP with an energy-less attack that could deal massive damage. On top of that, you could utilize Buck's training if you were going to fall just short of a KO to tack on an additional 10 damage and hit that even 100. All in all, this is maybe one of the best Gyarados cards to ever see play, and is definitely one of my favorites. And then there's Rumble Gyarados. It sure does exist. Heart Gold Soul Silver had 2 Gyarados cards, but honestly they're both kind of just starter deck tier. As you can see there, they have those high energy costs, not a whole lot of support, but some incredibly clean artwork that is very nice to look at, especially with the Heart Gold Soul Silver gold bordering going on. Gyarados G from the Platinum set. I don't really know what is going on with the artwork here, but Cyrus needs to get this Gyarados' shit together, because neither of its attacks are useful. High energy costs for very questionable situational outcomes. Definitely not a great showing for Gyarados. Which Gyarados from Dragons Exalted isn't much better. It's really just a filler rare through and through. The artwork is a lot nicer because, you know, it's actual art, even though it is a little bit babyfied. This is more like baby's first Gyarados. Legendary Treasure steps it back up with some really nice CG style artwork. I'm very surprised and a little bit impressed by this one, but this is a Gyarados that can be devastating late game. However, the problem is that if you're using it that late in the game, it'll become less and less safe to leave an unprotected Magikarp on your bench for a full turn. So it is a bit risky and you kind of have to play around it, but again, it's one of those high risk, high reward cards. Moving right along into Generations, we get this Waterfall Gyarados that is another great example of how a card can be good, but based on the overall environment of the metagame, doesn't actually see a lot of play. I think Berserker Splash is a solid attack for 3 energy, dealing 80 damage and spreading 10 around your opponent's bench, and then Aqua Tail for 1 more energy is dealing a little bit more base damage, but you also get a chance to deal an additional 30 for the correct coin flip for each water energy. But yet again, the main problem with this card is that it was a stage 1 that has to evolve from a low HP Magikarp, and as a single prize attacker, it takes a little bit too much setup. Just everything else in the metagame was way too fast, but still would have been an absolutely monster of a card to get in something like a pre-release draft where it would just storm the table. It's all about context. Ancient Origins gave us this beautiful full art Gyarados with trainer in perspective, and that's about the best you're going to get out of this card because it does rely heavily on placing damage counters on those Magikarp in order to pump it up a little bit. And like I said with the last Gyarados from Generations, this just wasn't the time for stage 1 Pokemon that relied on a very weak basic Pokemon, especially when the attacks aren't really worth the effort. Base set Gyarados was brought back and updated a bit for the 20th anniversary set evolutions. However, time had kind of left this card behind, much like it was left behind in its own original format. Even updating its HP and the damage of the attacks, it's still not usable, just more of a curiosity collector's item. With the Breakpoint set, we got another Gyarados EX. This time, it's mainly an amazing setup card for, well, itself, with Stormy Seas, where for one colorless energy you can flip a coin until you get tails, and for each heads, search your deck for water energy and slap it right onto this Gyarados. As you can see, we got 3 versions of this EX. 2 of them are full art, and all of them are shiny. But artwork wise, I gotta say I like the regular, normal EX version rather than the full arts. I think the full arts try a little bit too hard. But back to Stormy Seas, if you are able to power up your Gyarados EX with lots of water energy, you're not really gonna use them on Splash Burn. That is not the best attack here. Instead, you'll be Mega Evolving into Mega Gyarados and using Blast Geyser, which is where you're really going to be able to utilize all of those water energy. All of the Megas had really cool artwork on both the normal and kind of the breakout full art cards. Gyarados is no exception. However, most of the Megas that were released in the TCG were not all that usable or all that good. Really, even with the addition of like Gyarados Spirit Link, where it won't end your turn by Mega Evolving, it's still not exactly playable. In a competitive sense, all the Mega cards were super fun to use, especially with the Spirit Links, but yeah, when it came to the actual metagame, Megas were kinda out. So did Burning Shadows finally step Gyarados back up into the competitive game? Well, kinda, because you can make a really fun turn 2 deck out of this Gyarados with Venting Anger, and much like that Stormfront Gyarados using the same strategy, you could really get those Magikarp in your discard very quickly, and so you could easily deal 150 damage on turn 2, which is pretty amazing. Even in the Sun and Moon format, that meant you would be threatening GX Pokemon much earlier than they would normally expect it. Problem, once again, is that this is a stage 1, and most GX Pokemon also had super high HP coming in as basics, and so they would be able to knock out those Magikarps before you even got a chance to evolve up into a Gyarados or get your other Magikarps into the discard. I do think the artwork really nailed it here, though. I really like when Gyarados is more serpentine and fluid instead of in just that rigid, like, M shape that is usually in all of its artworks. And I really like when the color tones are a little more subtle. You get those beige belly scales rather than bright neon yellow that makes it look a little too cartoonish. Here it looks like a legit sea monster, and that's what I like to see in Gyarados depictions. And some nice, more mythological themed artwork here with Dragon Majesty. And this Gyarados has 160 HP. It also has an attack that can deal 160 HP without any drawbacks. So why was this not used? Well, because of its commotion ability, where anytime this Gyarados got damaged by an attack, all of your Pokemon got 2 damage counters placed on them. Well, you might say the easy way around this is don't have any other Pokemon in play. Just have the Gyarados in the active position and there will be no drawbacks to Wild Tail. But in that case, you know, you're waiting until turn 3 before you're dealing any damage, and by then, this Gyarados is going to be knocked out. Gyarados GX from Crimson Invasion is about as much of a filler GX card as you can imagine, as it seems like it's built more for one of those pre-constructed battle decks rather than being useful in any way or applicable to the metagame at all. Dreadstorm GX could be extremely disruptive to your opponent, but also is it really worth using your 1 GX attack? No, it isn't. It really says a lot about that Gyarados GX that the single prize Gyarados from the team up set is way better, way more usable, way more interesting, and is actually prettier to look at too. You can make such a fun, gimmicky deck with this Gyarados. The type of deck that will make people like rage quit on TCG Online because you're dealing such massive damage on turn 1 with a deck that's just Magikarp Gyarados Water Energy. And Hyper Beam's not bad either for 3 energy if you just want to start dealing that consistent damage and get the little bit of disruption off of discarding energy. And so compare again to another Gyarados GX from Hidden Fates that is kind of trash. Yes, it's got a lot of HP, but 4 energy for Dragon Rage for 130 damage when the last Gyarados we were looking at was dealing that for 1, and it was a single prize attacker. Yeah, get this GX garbage out of here. Rebel Clash Gyarados is just kind of boring and typical and simple. You know, put energy on there, do attacks. It's not very good, but it is very Gyarados. But not much more could be said for Gyarados V or Gyarados V Max from Rebel Clash, as these cards are kind of just high energy filler V Pokemon, doing the standard Gyarados thing without any real creativity put into these cards, which you would expect for V Pokemon, as they're supposed to be the standouts of each set, but for some reason Gyarados did not get that treatment. And I want to wrap up today with one of the truly rarest, most amazing spectacles that we can have with Gyarados, such as with this Gyarados from Call of Legends, where the artwork depicts it with its mouth closed. Look, I get that Gyarados is partly based on a wind sock, but it looks so much more intimidating when it finally shuts its hole. I mean, just look at this XY promo of Gyarados with its mouth closed. That's as menacing and dangerous as Gyarados is going to look, and that's some of the best Gyarados artwork you're going to find. And that's going to do it for the TCG history of Gyarados. Let me know down in the comments if there are any Gyarados cards that I missed. Also, let me know which ones are your favorites, or what are your hopes for Gyarados cards in the future. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!